choices shape the market, our society, and our quality of life. That's why Euroconsumers helps millions of people in their daily choices, providing simple solutions to complex problems. Euroconsumers is a cluster of organizations, a network of people, a group established to protect consumer rights and well-being that brings consumers and companies together in transparent relationships of trust that respect their independence. Our deep understanding of products and consumption gives consumers a credible, expert voice worldwide. We bridge the gap between buyers and manufacturers, between supply and demand. And in this digital age, we create opportunities for all parties to come together in constructive dialogue, partnering to build a future of better products and services. Euroconsumers has the power of a global group that believes humanity can develop, grow, and change for the better, and that we can promote this by uniting millions of consumers in strength and speaking responsibly for them while simultaneously engaging in relationships of trust with responsible, sustainable companies.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Start Talking. We're discussing green and digital. Are they at odds or are they, in fact, in sync? So hello to everyone watching live and to anyone who's out there watching the recording. Euroconsumers will be live tweeting, and you can follow that or join in with the hashtag Start Talking. So all across the world, countries are striving to meet the joint goals of sustainability and digitalisation. In Europe, this is labelled the twin transition, and it's shaping lots of economic and political priorities. And we know digital and sustainability can also bring many opportunities. So you might think of the example of smart energy grids, which would bring jobs, deliver energy efficiency, and maybe eventually even push down prices for consumers. So there's lots of things that can be happening on national scale or regional scale. But all of the use of digital does come with some carbon cost, and that might not be the only challenge we have. Our climate systems need to be fixed quite urgently on a global scale. And here, sometimes these two ambitions don't quite align. Let's think also that as digital technology becomes ever more advanced, it needs more compute power, more resources, energy, water, human resources, etc., to keep going. And at the same time, we have millions of people who don't have any connectivity at all, who are ready to come online and will be demanding more of their services. So can technology become climate neutral across the world? Do we need to rethink exactly how we innovate with digital and start putting the environment front and centre of all digitalisation priorities and strategies? Or perhaps there's something that's fundamentally incompatible in our current digital business model that's incompatible with sustainability. We're going to discuss all of these questions today with a fantastic panel that we've put together to think about how we can reach both those goals at the same time, if it's possible. So I'm really pleased to introduce you, first of all, to Ilias Yakovidis, who's an advisor at the European Commission, DG Connect, and he works on maximising the synergies between the digital and green transitions. In particular, he focuses on quantifying what the impacts are and supporting the transition to the circular economy using some digital solutions, for example, the digital product passport, and he's going to be talking about that later. Next, we have Anju Mangal, who is head of Asia and Pacific at the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership. She focuses on advancing connectivity across and digital inclusion across Asia and the Pacific. She's worked in that region for many years, and she's vice chair of the Asia Pacific Internet Governance Forum. And she works across the region on digital rights, digital inclusion, cybersecurity, privacy, and all sorts of issues. So welcome, Anju. Next, we have Fieke Janssen, who's from the Critical Infrastructure Lab at the University of Amsterdam. Fieke is a self-proclaimed tech skeptic, and we'll find out what she means by that later on. She's worked for many years at the place where environmental and digital rights overlap. And she's currently part of this new lab at the University of Amsterdam, which is researching how you might understand and build more sustainable infrastructure for the people and planet. Next, we have Jake Oster, who's the Director for Energy and Environmental Policy, EMEA, at Amazon Web Services, where he heads up the energy and environmental policy for Amazon Web Services. Prior to working at Amazon, he worked for Energy Savvy, which was a Seattle-based clean tech company. He also served as Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Congressman Peter Welch and oversaw his work on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. So welcome, Jake. We are really hoping also to be joined by Emma Fryer, who's a partner at ERM and formerly of Tech UK. But ironically enough, she's having some connection problems. I think she's overseas at the moment. So we're having some real challenges trying to get her online. We're hoping that we'll be able to fix that and get her involved in the conversation later, because she has an excellent experience in greening the ICT sector and knows a lot about things like how you might green a data center or use ICT to reduce emissions. So fingers crossed we can get Emma online soon. But while we wait, we're going to turn to Ilyas with the first opening question. Ilyas, can you explain your take on the nexus of the green and digital transition and what the European Union is trying to achieve with this?
Thank you, Liz, and good afternoon to everybody. As we know, the green and digital, those two transitions kind of dominate and are top priorities for the European Commission. Now, the first level of reading of green and digital, which is actually, unfortunately, still majority of people reading it like that, is that the green transition and that the digital transition are more equal than other transitions. So when you look at it, you say, oh, demographic change, not as important as green, or social issues are not important as digital. So this is actually what we do not mean. And what we would like to see is what is the nexus and what is the interaction of these two. If you put it on that and say, okay, it's about their nexus, then people normally, majority of people go for the conflict. So the world is kind of divided, what I call between the solutionists and the pollutionists. So, and there are two very distinct narratives. There are the narratives of people that say data centers consume so much energy. They are responsible for so much carbon. Telecoms, the same. E-waste, fastest growing category. It's all pollution, pollution, pollution. And when I talk to environmentalists, many of them see mostly the pollution side. When I talk with industry and with the techie world, it's 99% the solution part. Without digitalization, nothing can happen. They're right. I mean, that's where things go. Digitalization is the key. Just throw digital at something and the world will be greener. So we have this kind of very specific two narratives. And what I and what Commission would like to do is that we get away from those two extremes and we go to something what I call the net impact of digitalization. We know the two narratives differ in one very specific way. When you talk to the pollutionist, it's all about measured, realized, real data and measurements. So much electricity consumption, so much carbon because of that, so many tons of e-waste. So it's measured, measurable, real. When you talk to solutionists, it's about what will be, the potential, what can be, what could happen. And nobody can estimate the real effects of that. So what we're trying to do is to actually say, okay, let's get real and let's put evidence of what is the enablement. And it could be that the enablement is many times more than the footprint, but we need to prove it. And it gets very tricky because to estimate the enablement, it's really, really difficult. And once we get that, and we already have those, so under the frame of European Green Digital Coalition, we have done these calculations. We have proven that smart environment in the building can save so much emissions. We can prove precision farming if done correctly. But the hardest part of those calculations is that you assume design, use, and governance of the solution. So When you use it, you don't cross boundaries called rebound effects. You don't put too many gadgets to do what you want to do. You don't stimulate other behaviors that take you away from the net positive scenarios very quickly to nightmare scenarios, which are more harmful. And what I'm talking about, just to close, and what I want Anju and others to then kind of complement that, what I'm doing now is to bring in the forgotten dimension of sustainability. The digital world for decades has partnered mostly with the economic dimension of sustainability. It is struggling several years now with the social dimension of sustainability, but it has just discovered the environmental one. But becoming very drastic and very ambitious on environmental, let's don't forget we cannot do it on the expense of social issues, because they will be the ones that will make it or break it, the whole climate action and the Green Deal objectives. And of course, nobody can really touch the economic as well. So let's make sure that digital serves three dimensions and we optimize against those three. And nobody actually at the moment knows how to do it. And there is no institution, there's no framework to optimize digitalization against three dimensions of sustainability. The world is too siloed for that at the moment.
Okay, that's really interesting points. And I'm glad you mentioned the dimensions of sustainability, because I want to bring Anju in on this. Your work with the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership is about getting online connectivity for people without access at all. That's very much part of the social, human, and economic part of sustainability. Why is connectivity so critical to building that social and individual capital and well-being, in your view?
Thanks, Liz. I like Ilya's point about solutionist, but I'll take it back to what the reality is for many of us. When we talk about digital connectivity, we're always thinking of the low and middle income countries in the global south that are left behind, especially people in the rural and remote communities with limited resources and infrastructure. Our work highlights the importance of meaningful connectivity, which is all about connecting the unconnected and making sure that they have affordable internet data, able to use affordable devices, able to access internet on a daily basis, and also able to enjoy internet every day. So, what does that really mean for a person with disabilities sitting in a remote community? They should be able to access affordable assistive device, and we should find ways to support their well-being online. And what does that mean to a student sitting in a remote village? Should also have the same benefits as someone with 4G connectivity, but unfortunately many still struggle with basic infrastructure like electricity. Digital connectivity is so important, but one of the critical components of our work is to ensure that when we develop broadband policies or universal access policies, we focus on digital solutions, but also thinking about cross-sectoral infrastructure sharing solutions that will work in a remote place. So, for example, having energy source where internet access and electrification, they are concurrent efforts, right? And during COVID, we realized how important meaningful connectivities because it increased the chance of employment online. Households could get income through online businesses, but it also posed a lot of challenges for people in the remote communities, in the highlands, that basically did not have meaningful connectivity. When we talk about sustainability, it's very dear to me and also dear to my heart, because we think about not just one particular stakeholder, but we look at it from a multi-stakeholder point of view. How do we bring up these solutions to make sure that it benefits the people that are actually left behind or the marginalized communities that are struggling with just basic infrastructure? So I think, there's quite a lot of things happening in our region and also in Asia in terms of, climate change, events on, when there's loss of infrastructure or loss of electricity. A couple of days ago, I didn't have electricity. And I was constantly being told, like, you should buy a generator. But affordability is a big issue in the Pacific. Affordability is a big issue in some of these low and middle income countries. And then just trying to figure out, okay, you need a power bank, or you need to make sure that you're constantly connected, but finding solutions with telcos, not just telcos, but also with governments and key operators like mobile operators is very crucial. So for me, I think we need to think about it from holistic point of view, because it's all about looking at the digital ecosystem, right? And we cannot think about digital ecosystem, we cannot think about sustainability if you're not actually thinking about that one person sitting in a remote place or sitting on an island without basic infrastructure. I'm just going to leave it at that, and we can talk about more later.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, I've got loads more that we can come back to on that. We're really pleased that Emma Fryer is able to join us. I've given you your introduction already. I don't know whether you heard it, but you basically worked for a long time leading issues on climate change and ICT. You're saying you can't hear me. Oh no. Okay, I'll put it in the chat. Let me come back to you in a little bit, and I'll try and figure out how to do that. Jake, can I come to you then? I'm going to ask you about data centers. They get an awful lot of attention, and my theory is it's something that's quite easy for people to visualize and see and imagine, this big dirty whirring machine that's very hot and sucking up energy. And there's been like some documentaries and things on it, so it's captured people's imaginations. But what do you think of that? Is it worth the headlines? And what's Amazon doing in terms of the impact of your data centers?
Yeah, so first of all, Liz, thanks for inviting us to speak and inviting me to speak today. I really appreciate the opportunity. So for Amazon, and of course AWS, which is part of Amazon, which is our cloud computing business, and of course operates the AWS cloud, which I think is a part of our business that you're talking about when you refer to data centers. For Amazon, we're committed to sustainability for the planet, for our business, for our customers, and of course for the communities we are where we're based in. And so we have sustainability goals that are across our company, including AWS and including our data centers. One of those sustainability goals is to be net zero carbon by 2040. So in 2019, we co-founded something called the Climate Pledge and set ourselves on that goal to be net zero carbon by 2040. And we recognized that we couldn't do it alone. And so we went out and invited other companies to come join us. That was a little more than 3 years ago. Fast forward to today, more than 400 companies have joined us in setting a goal to be net zero carbon by 2040 by joining the Climate Pledge. And so we're really proud of taking that leadership and inviting other companies and building a coalition of companies who are all working together to reach net zero carbon across their business. Of course, you mentioned energy when you talk about data centers. You can't talk about a data center without talking about energy. And then, of course, that means electricity and how we power data centers. So as part of our effort to get to net zero carbon, one of the things we're doing is we have a goal to be powered by 100% renewable energy. That goal is to get there by 2030. We've been moving very fast at the target. And so we're now on a path to get there 5 years ahead of time by 2025. We're doing that by purchasing renewable energy and adding new renewable energy to the grids where we operate. In fact, we're using power purchase agreements a lot, which are obviously a very common topic right now as we're talking about electricity issues in Brussels and across Europe. Globally, Amazon is now the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy as we work towards powering our business. So as of last year, we were 85% renewable, which means we're not there yet. And we've announced more than 20 gigawatts of new renewable energy around the world. So to put that into context, if I just look at our European slice of our portfolio, so in Europe, it's about 4.5 gigawatts. And that is enough to power more than 3 million average European homes annually. So as we work to reach net zero carbon, we're also working to reach 100% renewable. And we're doing all this work to power our data centers with clean energy and reach net zero carbon, which then, of course, is part of achieving our goals and making sure that we are giving our customers access to a sustainable cloud. There's a lot more work getting done there as well. Like, in fact, just last year, we announced one of our newest sustainability goals, that we are working to be water positive by 2030, which means we will return more water to the communities where we operate by 2030, and we're working very hard on that. There's a lot of aspects that we're focused on across our business around sustainability. I think I'm also really excited to talk about some of the work we're doing in the cloud. And I think Ilias talked about that before, about technology as a solution, and maybe I'll save some of that for later, because I think there's some exciting work getting done. In fact, even some things we just went public today that I can talk about a little later. Thanks.
Great, hot off the press. We'll look forward to doing that. I want to come to Fika now and bring you in. If we just look at improving what's already there, are we missing something bigger that needs to change?
Yes, I mean, it was very nice to listen to the other speakers, and also thanks for setting up this panel. And I was really struck by what Ilias said about sort of like the solutionist being industry and sort of the pollutionist being environmentalist, like focusing on these two things and treating them as if they were equal. And I think this is really the challenge of a lot of the industry and policy discourse I'm also hearing at this table, that we fail to take into account that sort of industry does things for profit and environmentalists do things to save the planet. And these are very different incentives, and we cannot treat them equally. We can also not treat them equally to say that they have equal access to policymakers or to shift things in a certain direction. So how Ilias was sort of explaining these things is like, but these are not equal power holders, and by making them equals, we sort of create a false economy, or we create misleading narratives around what actually the intersection between climate and technology is. Because in the end, the solutionist answers, even if we find a sweet spot in the middle, I think it's like the comfortable answer. So it's the answers that people want to hear. We can just like optimize our way out of the climate crisis, optimize our way around environmental degradation. I think several scholars from Adriana Butler, but also Prister have called this green capitalism, where we view problems around the climate and the environment as sort of through an economic lens, and think we can optimize our way out of it without actually thinking that maybe growth is the problem in itself. And by infinitely growing the tech industry, we're not actually offering a solution. We are just sort of like doing more of the same, but just giving a green label around it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't sort of optimize for energy consumption, and that we shouldn't optimize for water consumption, and that it isn't great that people are like taking these things seriously. But I think the real fundamental question is, can we optimize our way out of this? Or do we radically need to change sort of how we're approaching things? And I think here it's really like, it's important to also see sort of the externalities of certain things, because if we optimize very individual pieces of work, we tend to fail to see the larger body of it. So whether this is for mining or e-waste, which was already mentioned, but also just the conflict that arises, because the Netherlands is one of the places where many tech companies come to host their data centers because of an active policy by the government to bring Silicon Valley into the Netherlands. With the promise of a lot of green energy. And we see that it's creating sort of a false economy, because on the one hand, we're getting a lot of data centers. So Google's there, Microsoft is there, Facebook was going to come for for some of their new products, and they were going to build mega data centers there. And so windmill parks have been built in local territories, saying sort of local production for local consumption. But then in the end, 100% goes to a tech company, and all the households are still on fossil fuel and not on renewable energy. So it's not like just saying sort of like our company is going net neutral by going to places where there's green energy and then offsetting the rest through carbon credits. It's like a small piece of the puzzle, but it's not the entire puzzle. And I think sort of in our solutions pushing forward, if we just keep on centering sort of these individual wins without looking at the collective, we will lose in the end. Because just doing more that's less shitty maybe, is that really the future that we want to work towards? Or do we really want to start thinking about less? How can we do less of it? And do we actually need all of these computing powers? Do we need all of this data storage? Do we need all of these things? Or do we need to start thinking through other futures?
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I think it's great points. And I think what it's showing is, with not very good as a society, dealing with these really complex overlapping things and the externalities that happens and the unintended consequences that happen. But we really have to try to deal with those, and we have to do it pretty quickly. I'm just going to see if Emma can come in. Emma, can you hear me? And can we hear you? Okay, I'm really sorry. I don't think we can, so I'm going to have to leave that for now. I'm talking about why this is so urgent. I just wanted to come back to Andrew as well, because in your Asia Pacific region, you've actually experienced the impact of climate change induced events on things like energy and digital networks. So there's a really stark challenge there for people.
Sorry, I was still looking for my unmute button. Thanks, Liz. The Asia and Pacific is a disaster-prone region. We are vulnerable to natural disasters such as earthquakes, tsunamis, cyclones, flooding. And I know that other countries are also going through the same thing. But I just wanted to give an example of what happened in Tonga and just looking at what some of the solutions were. In January 2022, a volcano erupted in Tonga, which is a small island nation in the Pacific, and this was followed by a tsunami damaging the coastal areas and leaving around 100,000 people unconnected. The tsunami destroyed the undersea fiber optic cable, which connects Tonga to the rest of the world. There was a loss of livelihoods, infrastructure, like electricity, and also basic necessities. But the good thing was the cable ship, which was, I think, owned by Subcom, arrived in Tonga, but it was months later. And then, the engineers worked hard to assess the damage and repair the cables, but they were still trying to find out what would be the solutions to make sure that this does not happen again, right? Even like Elon Musk's team, they sent a team of engineers to Fiji to work on the internet gateway. The domestic links were reconnected with the support of Digicel, Telstra, along with Intelsat, Spark, Optus, and they worked with the Tonga Communication Corporation to provide like satellite services. So that was one of the key solutions that was, brought into the country. So thinking about what would be the backup solutions when these things happen. However, they were not able to meet the people's demand for data as bandwidth was carefully controlled while the country's fiber optic cable was being prepared. And, other Pacific countries and other countries in Asia, they continue to face similar challenges, right? And the basic infrastructure gets destroyed, and it's really difficult for people to get back online. But I wanted to highlight that, now people are now thinking about smart cables, which looks at, how do we monitor tsunami, earthquake, early warning monitoring, etc. And these cables, when you think about the smart cables, it also looks at what would be feasible in the sense that, making sure that that if there is a disaster, nothing like this happens again. But I think one of the key points I want to mention here is that I think the partnerships for me is critical because it's not just about satellites, the broadband connectivity, but it's also about partnership with the energy department, the partnership with the rural electrification department. So these sort of things are very necessary when we are thinking about disasters and what would be smart in this case.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So we're going to really pick up on a couple of themes that were in the beginning there. We looked a bit in the last section about how we might maximize the efficiency and optimize and how the transitions might work together. But I'm going to focus a lot more now on maximizing the synergies between them. So I'm going to return to Ilyas to give a bit more of a take on how digital technology can do all these things, how it could enable a shift to a more sustainable circular economy. And if you could very quickly also explain what circular economy means for people where that might be a new term. Thank you.
Yes. Liz, if you allow, I will make a kind of a comment to what Fike said and Anju.
Of course,
So we
please.
make it a bit interactive, so it's not like a collective monologue. I would like to kind of second what Fike said, that digitalization is in the service of sustainability. So, but what we see as narratives is that digitalization 30 years ago was not part of summit discussions. It was not part of prime ministers and presidents' discussions. It was trade, military, geopolitics, you name it. Now it became. So in people's minds, and she's right, suddenly those two are like equivalent, which is kind of, that's why I don't like the word twin transition, because it puts them on the same base. I personally don't like that, although that's our president's language, I cannot say much. I would really want to make sure that people understand that digital is there to serve economy, society, and environment. So having said that, what I see Fike and the, let's say, environmentalists at large, is that they don't always realize the social or the economic implications of trying to optimize against the environmental axis. Because the social impact was very evident in COVID. 30% of people in Belgium did not lose their job. It's huge because there were teleworking. Digital saved our economy in a way during the COVID. So there are things for consumers that they prefer to do online. So there are so many other economic and social benefits that we need to optimize against those three dimensions. And then it gets really tricky, because when you optimize against economy only, I bet you it will be at the expense of social and environmental issues. If you optimize against environment, most probably the best solution is not to do much at all digital. Natural-based solutions have much bigger impact per se. Digitalization is a contributor. So we cannot do that in isolation. That's what I'm trying to call. Now, if we look at the bigger picture, let's look at the drivers that leads to biodiversity loss and to climate change. The biggest driver of all, to me, is non-circularity of our economy. It's the unlimited use of natural resources that we do, because we measure success and growth with GDP. Growth of GDP means automatically growth of use of natural resources. It's one-to-one. So what we need to do is to decouple that and redefine what we mean by growth, well-being, and all that stuff. So we are already doing post-GDP type studies. Now, how can we decouple natural resource use from well-being or sustainable prosperity, whatever we call it? Digitalization, if I had to choose where to use digitalization, if I had only one silver bullet and I had to choose, I would say, let's use it to make our economy circular. The power of enabling circular and sustainable business model is maybe the biggest when it comes to digitalization. The situational awareness of tracking supply chains, materials, products, sustainability of product, the footprint, reparability, refurbishment, reuse, there are 8 R's you can talk about before you go to recycling. That is enabled by digital. I don't just see, it cannot be done without digital. Those little circles, I don't know if you know about circular economy, it's about keeping the value of the materials as long as possible before it's wasted. Today, we manufacture too many things. We use them, if at all, because there are many things that are even unsold being destroyed. And then we waste them. So there is no circle in repairing, reusing, refurbishing, recycling. And the sufficiency principles have been completely forgotten. Circular economy is the oldest thing that happens on Earth. Earth is by design circular. Our predecessors, my grandparents, were much more circular than we are. It's nothing new as a concept. It's very difficult in the way we have becoming like consumer society. And Euro consumers, you have a huge, huge role to play to kind of educate consumers how they can address their needs with less materials, more durable materials, how to choose, how to use materials. So what we work on We have, as you know, Green Deal is like mother of all legislation. It is spitting out legislation like every week. The latest one that I work on is called Eco-Design for Sustainable Product Regulation. And within that, we have introduced with a team of colleagues, Digital Product Passport. It's something like a medical record of product. We want to see where it comes from, how sustainably it was put together, what are the materials, how reparable, durable, reusable it is, and have the information flow that follows and supports all those R's and circularity. Ultimately, it's about changing the what I call quantity-driven business model that we see very much in electronics as well. The businesses today make money by selling quantities of something, quantity of mobile phones, quantities of cars, quantities of fertilizers, instead of moving to services and with less quantities of materials, serving the needs of populations and your consumer society. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilyas. So instead of quantity, we want something else. If I'm going to give you the chance to come back on Ilyas's response to you, and then I'll go to Jake.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, so I agree actually with most of the things Ilyas said. I also think that that during COVID, definitely the economic value of tech was really underlined. How people can continue working despite within the measures that the government was taking in different countries about what it was. And I also just want to echo what Anju said about how certain populations are really underconnected and how there's different struggles than there are in Europe or North America or certain places in North America. And I think that's so. I agree, and for me, it's more a question of redistribution and also redesign. So I also don't want to make this a game between sort of like, oh, I have an example how sucky it is, or I have an example how good it is, because I think in the end, sort of we have examples of both sides, and depending on maybe where politically you align, you will have more examples of the one or the other. But I agree to some extent that it is in the circular economy bit that Ilyas mentioned, and the EU is working on a number of directives also for the mobile phone. But I think it's also about just being honest about that sort of our tech industry is polluting. I don't think we have to have that discussion anymore. Maybe we should have the discussion about what the trade-offs are. And then we can start picturing what it is that we do and don't want, and to what extent they're polluting and how we measure that. I think it's all really important to understand it. But when we look at the circular economy, for example, I really hope that sort of the new directive on the mobile phone allows me to fix this phone when it's broken, and that I don't have to buy a new one every 3 years, because this is not conducive to sort of to our planet. Because in the end, a lot of the products that come from here will not be recycled, and they all come from different territories in which none of us are located. So we're also not confronted with the negative impacts of what it actually means to have a lithium mine in your backyard, or what it means to have a copper mine in your backyard, or sort of how silicon gets produced and what the labor conditions are around this. So I think I agree that sort of the digital is part of sort of our economy, environment, and social, but not just in Europe. I mean, it's globally, because these are supply chain issues. So we also have to take responsibility for pollution that happens elsewhere for our own digitalization of the country. It's the same as sort of, somebody told me the other day that the Commission is talking about sustainable mining. Well, unless, I mean, there's a new solution, there is no sustainable mining. And so we have to also just be upfront about that and not create language that sort of becomes a smokescreen of actual pollution that's happening. Because as long as we keep on creating sort of these greenwashing frames, we can never really get at the heart of it. So yeah, I agree circular economy is part of it, but I also think there's no other way than sort of starting thinking in reduction. I mean, there is an entire degrowth movement. There's people who are thinking about limits within computing. There is a bigger movement that's also working towards what does limit within sort of our economic framework look like, because with only circular economy, we also won't get there. Not to be the Debbie Downer of the panel, but I think it's also realistic to have to sort of attend these conversations.
Yep, I think that's a good point. We need to be upfront, maybe stop comforting people with with jargon that makes you think everything's going to be okay? Because clearly we're really up against it and it's a race against time. Jake, did you want to come in on what Ilyas and Fika had said?
Yeah, absolutely. So first I want to come in and talk a little bit, because I think there were some comments around sort of data center location, and I do think it's important to talk about where data centers are located. And I talked to you, I said, I'm sitting here today in Dublin, Ireland. And for AWS, we have a data center region here in Dublin, Ireland, which is one of the reasons I'm up here today. And if I look at our data centers in Dublin, one of the benefits of being here is that it's a fairly cool climate, despite the fact that it looks a little sunny outside today. It is a fairly cool climate. So here in Ireland, one of the benefits we get to take advantage of is we get to use what's called free air cooling in our data centers, which means that we're able to use outside air for a good portion of the year to cool our data centers without needing to rely on additional resources to do that cooling. So when we look at how we're that digital infrastructure, and we look at how do we build it with a mindset towards sustainability and mostly towards energy efficiency, right? And focusing on energy efficiency. We know that the greenest electron is the electron you don't use, and we're having a lot of conversations today about sustainability, but we haven't really touched on energy efficiency yet in this discussion. And I think that's a really, really important part of the conversation when we talk about digitalization. So the way we're moving today, we are seeing an increased drive toward digitalization. We're seeing a need for more storage, more compute, and a greater reliance on data. And we can host that data in traditional data centers, on-prem data centers that are hosted at offices or in closets, or we can host that data in the cloud. And one of the things we know is that cloud computing is far more energy efficient than on-prem computing. We did a study with an outside firm and found that here in Europe, the AWS cloud is on average 5 times more energy efficient than traditional on-premises data centers operating in Europe. 5 times more energy efficient. So as we focus on the path towards digitalization and sustainability, leveraging those resources that help us increase energy efficiency are going to be critical. And then the other part of this is then thinking about what Ilyas had said around how we're using digitalization in order to support sustainability. And I think there are countless examples, but I do think there's maybe one or two that I want to share that I think are quite useful for this conversation. So one is we're hosting climate data in the cloud and making it available. We have a program that we call the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, where we're using climate data, working with government organizations like the UK Met Office, Meteo France, NOAA, and making climate data available and sustainability data available in the cloud for researchers and the public to use in ways they couldn't do before. And one example is we partnered with an organization called Digital Earth Africa, and they're using satellite data in partnership with universities in Tanzania, and they're able to monitor using satellite data what's going on in mangrove forests to watch for deforestation and to watch for the survival of those mangrove forests and be able to respond in real time when there's risks to those forests. And if you know about those forests, they're very important as carbon sinks. So that's one example of using data and using cloud computing and democratizing access to that data as a way to really help drive sustainability. Another example I mentioned that we did something today is some of my colleagues are in Copenhagen today, and they're on stage at the Wind Europe event, and then they're there with I think colleagues from the Commission, folks from the International Energy Agency, and what they're doing is they're actually launching a prototype to do beta testing around using cloud computing and digitalization to speed up the wind permitting process and the renewable energy permitting process. Right? We have to deploy a large amount of renewable energy over the course of the next decade in order to decarbonize the power sector here in Europe and meet the goals of certain energy independence, as well as the goals of the Renewable Energy Directive. There's roughly 80 gigawatts of wind energy projects stuck in permitting. It takes a very long time to do wind permitting. If we can use digitalization to speed up workloads, to make things go faster and to automate some of that, we can expedite the ability for wind energy deployment and meet some of those goals. And so those are just two examples. There are countless others. of how digital is going to play a really, really important role in how we move forward to be able to meet some of these sustainability challenges we have.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. And I think, and maybe as speaker said, there's great examples on both sides. I'm wondering if there's also this bigger question though, and it's interesting when you mentioned data, because something I'd read recently said that the increase in need for data storage is because of the increase in collecting lots and lots of biometric data about people. So, and do we need to just step back and ask some fundamental questions? Really, is what is the value of doing that useful, or are there privacy, security risks, etc., loss of autonomy risks that are present within that worth it? And I think for me, it's a bigger question. Is there something I'd like to sort of put to all of you? Is there just something fundamentally unsustainable about the way that we do digital at the moment, which is based on just collecting more and more and more? Who'd like to take that?
Maybe let me start just saying what I said in the beginning, that what Jake and Fike and Andrew actually talked about is good examples of ICT or bad examples of ICT. What I'm trying to get away from what Fike said, this type of examples or the opposite type of examples, and talk about net effects with respect to sustainability. Because if we measure net effect, we may actually decide to pollute a little bit more with digitalization, to say, I will increase the digital connectivity, which will increase the direct footprint of digital, but I guarantee with the net effect that I will cut 5 times more somewhere else. So if we can measure the net effect and the multiplication effect, if the net effect is, let's say, 3 times or 5 times positive, it'll be a policy change, and kind of all of us, we will decide, yes, let's make the ICT world, which is today about 3% of total emissions, let's increase it to 3 or to 4 or to 5, if I can at the same time cut in the energy sector, transport sector, agricultural sector, manufacturing, you name it, 20% of the emissions. So yes, I will trade the 2 for 20. So that kind of decisions, for that we need evidence, and we need consistent, standardized metric to measure net effect. And then, yes, let's do digitize more. But digitalizing naively will get you nowhere. The governance and precision is everything. And we are not yet there. The governance is missing. So we have a lot of time, and I can give you examples, like in Africa, what Andrew was saying about connectivity in Global South. There are many programs that subsidize a little bit of a kind of a luggage to remote areas where I open it, there is a satellite dish, there is the internet connectivity, there is a phone connectivity. If this is not durable, reparable, and skilled, and handled with people with skill, these things are in no time huge e-waste. So there are good ways to do it, and there are bad ways to do it. Precision farming sounds good, but if it is about spreading gadgets around farmers that don't know how to use them, will never use them optimally, you actually do harm. So the good idea has non-intended consequences like hell in digital. So the governance is everything. Instead, you can talk, for example, to Bayer and say, look, guys, instead of selling pesticides, sell services. You become digital company. You get fixed amount per hectare from farmers, and you give them health, crop protection. You guarantee the health and yield. And you as a company then will be basically spending minimum number of herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, because they are cost to you. So there are business models that digitalization can enable that are good or bad. So it's not digitalization the problem.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to, Andrew wanted to come in on the conversations that have been going on. Andrew, what's your take?
Thanks. I like some of the solutions my colleagues are sharing, but I continue to ask this question: what exactly is the energy consumption of tech devices, particularly the ones that we cannot recycle, the internet and the online portals or systems, or even data centers or data storage? We haven't done any evidence-based research to look at how ICTs consume electricity, but we have done some research on sustainable access and looking at energy efficient solutions. I also wonder how all this translates into global greenhouse emissions. So it would be good to look at some real solutions based on some of this evidence-based research, because I think that really would help a country like ours, or maybe a country in the Pacific or Asia. There was a comment about e-waste. So I just wanted to say that the Pacific has a huge issue with recycling and disposing of e-waste or devices or ICT equipments. For example, most e-waste in Fiji is landfilled or burnt. In Samoa, they collect e-waste, which is done by a private recycling operation, but much of it is still exposed or untouched. And a number of challenges like this persist, including policy framework, and also looking at, what would be some of the policy interventions and policies to support digital and green transition. Although for a lot of these countries, it's very new to policymakers, some of the policymakers and organizations, so they don't necessarily talk about this. Many in some of these developing countries. But having said that, we do have some great stories like community networks, right? In Asia, they use bamboo towers for relay of wireless radio signal. Sorry, we also have like Smart Island Initiative that looks at green digital solutions. For example, in Vanuatu, they have power and reliable energy and small-scale solar power generators that powers devices and equipment. So these are some of the, for me, I think it's again a cross-sectoral infrastructure thing, but not necessarily looking at what the energy consumption is for all of this, because obviously I know that we are definitely thinking about it, but unfortunately not many policymakers in developing countries can relate to it, because their first most important thing is to connect the unconnected and to make sure that they have solutions to connect people.
Yeah, thanks, Anju. Thanks for that perspective. I think what's interesting about this Start Talking is often we're talking about what consumers should do differently or could do, or their feelings. And a lot of this is at the infrastructural level, where sure, they can have some impact, but it does seem that there's big decisions that need to be made at the policy infrastructure level, which are going to have a bigger impact. We've got just a question for you, Jake, as well. You did talk a lot then about the existing work that Amazon's doing to green and optimize, but are there discussions at a corporate level on the sort of at the more macro things like less computation and sharing and storing less consumer and industry data? Are those things under consideration at all?
I'm really glad you asked that, Liz. And it was actually what I wanted to talk about, kind of following on what Ilya said and what Fika said, around that question of like how to manage data and how to think about data as a resource, and as well as the energy data that data uses, how we think about how we use the cloud as a resource. So I mentioned earlier that we have a goal to be net zero carbon by 2040. We are on a pathway to be powered by 100% renewable, and we're it looks like we're going to get there by 2025. So we're very focused on the sustainability of the cloud and how we make the cloud sustainable for our customers. But then we also recognize that we want our customers to take responsibility and take ownership over building sustainably in the cloud. And so we think of this as a shared responsibility model, but it also means that we need to give our customers the tools to do that, right? Our customers need to have those tools and they need to have understanding. So we actually have something called the well-architected framework. And we have different pillars within the well-architected framework that gives our customers an understanding of how to architect in the cloud and how to build in the cloud to think about sustainability. And so we've added a sustainability pillar to the well-architected framework. And so I will be the first to confess that I don't often, I struggle when it comes to speaking tech and data because I don't code. So you'll have to bear with me, but certainly like we're looking at this and you know, one of the things we look at is, you know, explaining to customers that if you decommission unused assets, that you can reduce the number of cloud resources required to support your demand and minimize waste. And so there's a benefit of removing unused assets because you free resources and you improve your efficiency. So That's an example of the kind of information we're giving to our customers through this well-architected framework as we think about empowering our customers around that shared responsibility model of really architecting sustainably in the cloud.
Thanks very much. We're coming to the last sort of 5 minutes of this session. We've covered so much stuff, and actually there's a lot that we haven't that I thought we would. But one thing I did want everyone to reflect on, and I'm really interested in, is do you think that we've fallen into a bit of a trap that only digital can save us? And is that okay, really? I mean, do we ignore the other more simple solutions, maybe just reducing or stopping doing certain things in favor of going straight to putting the digital one off the shelf? So instead of smart cars with their own individualized computer, is the better infrastructure just to build more cycle lanes, as an example? So I think this comes back to some of the questions we had before, that maybe we just have to face up to what we do and don't want to do, and what we can and can't live without. So I just would like to hear from all of you in a sort of final closing comment and perspective on that. Ilyas, would you like to go first?
I think there is. It's really funny you ask this. I had a master's student that did his master thesis exactly a year ago, and I asked him, go through all the legislations that are relevant for green, digital, circular economy, environmental and digital acts that we have published, and match them on the axis of techno-optimism and techno-pessimism, holistic or segmented. And guess where we are mostly as EU, as legislation, but I see that also in the society at large. We are kind of on the segmented techno-optimism. So techno-optimism that Deus ex machina, technology will come and save us. Don't touch my comfort zone, don't touch my purse. Technology will come and somehow it will miraculously, like ancient Greek tragedy, will come and save us last minute. So we have that in our DNA. I don't know what's happening, but we do believe that and that's multicultural in Europe. It's not just one culture or the other. So we have that. We also are very segmented because we have, as a kind of orthologistic culture of science, we focus on what we understand and what's measurable. So we segment. I mean, don't confuse me with facts around other things. I understand biology. I understand environment. No, I understand sociology. No, I understand economy. So we are very segmented and techno-optimist a bit. So digital is just one of those technologies. The name of the game today, as you know, is the green tech. So digital is not really the biggest ticket on that. But you have grid technologies, you have hydrogen, you have offshore wind, and they are all digitally enabled as well. Yeah. So you see that drive. Let's forget all the rules of competition. Let's forget everything, and let's give to green tech to save us all the money against all the other rules that we have set up over the decade. So that is there. It's there. I don't know what to say, but sometimes all that effort is done on the expense of nature-based solution that could actually get us further. But there is this fascination that technology can get us there. On the other hand, there is no other way. We cannot go back and go back several hundred years and go back to very sufficient kind of Mormons-like life. We can't do that either. So we need to innovate like hell, but we need to govern that innovation a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Andrew, what do you think? Do you think that digital is the only answer to save us?
So my background is all digital, but I'm now focusing a lot on policy. So yes, digital technology, it's enhanced our lives in the Pacific as well, in Asia. Lots of people are using smartphone. We have manufacturing companies that have smartphone, and people are using online systems to purchase items. People are doing online business. We are also looking at now SMEs, digital tech to carry out their day-to-day transactions. But there's always a dark side of tech, right? So it's good, but it's also bad. But how do we tackle that is very important. And for me, I think it's also about when you, and I mentioned this earlier, is when you look at the digital ecosystem, you also have to think about the security aspect. But for a person coming from, because I was brought up on an island, right? But it's difficult to have, for example, solutions like smart cars in remote islands. If you live in cities with charging points, then it's worth buying. I'm sorry, it's difficult to have solutions like smart cars in remote islands, right? But if you live in cities with charging points, then it makes a lot of sense to buy, for example, a smart car or electric car or bike. But if you are in a country where 60 or 70% of the country is still without electricity, then it may be worth thinking about how do we come up with some good sustainable business models that support, again, cross-sectoral solutions. And one of our biggest problem right now is when we talk about digital can save us, is affordability, right? We want digital to save us, but affordability is a big issue in some of these islands, and we need solutions that can make that is affordable for communities that are left behind. Even having solar powered energy, renewable energy, etc., it's not cheap. Those panels are not cheap at all. So it does not mean that it's going to be the final solution, but we need to work together. And again, I would like to say evidence-based research before we figure out the solutions. But I would say, yes, I'm all for digital, but thinking about what is feasible for someone sitting in a remote island.
Thanks, Anne. I'm really quickly going to ask Jake to tell us what he thinks, and then I'll come to you, Fika, and then we'll close. But if you could just tell us as quickly as you can, Jake, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll go very fast. And I think the thing that is top of mind for me lately is the energy transition and and the flexibility needed to drive the energy transition so we can have more clean energy and renewable energy on the grid. And when I think about getting to flexibility and demand response programs, those are built entirely on data. The only way to get thousands of people to respond to the ability to respond to fluctuations or demand response calls on the grid is to rely on data and to rely on the cloud computing and to rely on that communication system to be able to inform all those customers to take those actions. And so when I think about that energy transition and that push towards flexibility, I think of cloud computing and digitalization as such a key and necessary part of that.
Absolutely. And Fika, do you think digital will save us?
No, but maybe a way to get there is to also, I think, like, we hear very nice stories from the industry. We hear sort of also Elias talking about the direction that the Commission is heading, and sort of the challenges also from the global south and in sort of Pacific, the island Pacific regions. And I think it's really important to start building critical voices and critical understandings of this nexus of tech and climate, because if we only leave it to policymakers and industry, I don't think we'll get to the place where we want to get, because we sort of miss the societal voice in it. And so what I see, especially in Europe, is that we have a lot of digital rights movements and environmental movements, but that they don't necessarily work on this nexus. And I think some critical voices are missing there.
Absolutely. And the consumer rights voices as well.
Yes.
Because obviously the original consumer rights also include healthy environment and access to IT and things like that. So there's probably a nice nexus we can build around that too. Okay, thanks everybody so much. Really sorry that we missed Emma. Hope we can talk to you again on another Start Talking for something else. Thanks to everyone for participating. And thanks to everyone who's been listening and following or rewatching this. You can stay up to date with Euroconsumers on LinkedIn and Twitter. And our next Start Talking next month will be about the ongoing food price crisis and how that's affecting consumers and how that cuts across the different supply chains and the challenges we've got there. So we'll probably be touching on, again, many of these overlapping issues which we've talked about today. Thank you so much, all of you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.